Hello guys, I'll tell you a story. Once upon a time, in a village far away, there lived a girl of unparalleled beauty. Her mother loved her deeply, and her grandmother loved her even more. One day, the beloved grandmother sewed a bright red hood for her granddaughter. The girl adored the hood so much that she never wanted to take it off. Everywhere she went, she wore her red hood, earning her the nickname Little Red Riding Hood. One day, her mother baked some pies and said to her daughter, "Why don't you visit your grandmother? She isn't feeling well. Take these pies and a pot of butter to her. Just be sure not to stray into the woods and don't talk to strangers." Little Red Riding Hood was an obedient girl. She quickly gathered the pies and the pot of butter and set off to her grandmother's house in another village. As she walked along a forest path, she encountered a wolf. The wolf was hungry and thought of making a meal out of the girl, but he hesitated because he could hear the sounds of woodcutters nearby. So, he asked, "Where are you going, Little Red Riding Hood?" The poor girl forgot the warning about stopping and talking to strangers in the woods, so she replied, "I'm going to my grandmother's house to bring her some pies and a pot of butter." "How far does your grandmother live?" the wolf inquired. "Very far," Little Red Riding Hood answered, "just beyond that mill you can see at the edge of the forest, and her house is the first one when you enter the village." The wolf then said, "You know what? I'll visit your grandmother too. I'll take this path, and you take the other. Let's see who can get there faster." The wolf sprinted as fast as he could along the shortest path, while the girl strolled leisurely along the longer route. Along the way, she picked wildflowers and hummed tunes to herself. The wolf arrived at the grandmother's house first. He knocked on the door, saying, "Knock, knock." "Who's there?" came the feeble voice from inside. "It's your granddaughter, Little Red Riding Hood," the wolf replied in a high-pitched voice. "I've brought you some pies and a pot of butter." The grandmother was lying in bed because she wasn't feeling well. She called out, "Pull the string, and the door will open by itself." The wolf pulled the string, and the door opened. He rushed inside, devoured the old lady in one gulp, for he hadn't eaten for more than 3 days. Then he closed the door, climbed into the grandmother's bed, and waited for Little Red Riding Hood, who arrived a little later. She knocked on the door, saying, "Knock, knock." "Who's there?" growled the wolf, trying to imitate her grandmother's voice. "It's your granddaughter, Little Red Riding Hood," she replied. "I've brought you some pies and a pot of butter." The wolf couldn't contain his excitement any longer. He shouted, "Pull the string, and the door will open by itself." Little Red Riding Hood pulled the string, and the door swung open. She walked in and saw her grandmother lying in bed. "Grandmother, grandmother, why do you have such big hands?" she asked. "That's to hug you better, my dear," replied the wolf. "Grandmother, grandmother, why do you have such big ears?" "That's to hear you better, my dear." "Grandmother, grandmother, why do you have such big eyes?" "That's to see you better, my dear." "Grandmother, grandmother, why do you have such big teeth?" The wolf couldn't wait any longer. With a snarl, he leaped out of the bed and lunged at Little Red Riding Hood, ready to devour her. Fortunately, at that moment, the woodcutters who had heard the commotion burst into the house. They rescued Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother, who were unharmed. And so, Little Red Riding Hood learned a valuable lesson about not talking to strangers in the woods. The wolf was driven away, and she and her grandmother lived happily ever after. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like,